Oi you, it's time for another episode of Dorothy and the Dealer. Let's tune into the conversation.
So have you got a song to start us off today?
Don't save a prayer for me now. And it's riffed, is that right?
It's riff.
Save it till the morning after. Somebody played it the other day. I was like, shit, that was a great Duran Duran song. I wasn't really a big Duran Duran fan, and I think they lost it after they did a fucking James Bond movie, the music for a James Bond movie. But up until then, they were okay. They were okay. But that particular song, Don't Save a Prayer for Me Now, is a fucking great song.
So you heard it the other day. You weren't just looking it up randomly today.
No.
You heard it the other day.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Because we've got to a point in our podcast recordings that you actually have to look up YouTube to remember the tunes.
That's because I'm 47 years old.
You are.
And I did a lot of drugs.
In your day.
It fucked me up.
Yes, well, you said it, not me. Anyway.
Yep, meanwhile, back at the
How are we
ranch.
going?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to do a little bit of talking about this rabbit hole. Let's talk about the rabbit hole.
Well, the rabbit hole in terms of what's going on in the world at the moment.
Crazy fucking Hollywood.
We did kind of touch on this on one of our lives the other day.
Yeah.
And we thought that it's good to have a discussion further on podcast. And we might have to do this over a couple of podcasts. Let's wait and see how long it takes us.
It's just because there's so much fucking craziness, online at the moment. It's like, and that's coming, so much stuff coming out of Hollywood, so much stuff coming out of the US,
Well, it's not just Hollywood. It's not just the US. It's the fact that this whole year has started off and has had so many twists and turns and full on
it's crazy.
Right,
and it's kind of like if it's real, fuck, it's scary, and if it's not real, fuck, it's scary. The fact that it's
either way,
somebody's fucking conjuring up that stuff and people are getting hooked into it.
Yes.
And I think it's important for us to start off about talking about our concept of where you have to come from when you look at that stuff.
Well, I think that the reason that we have got to a point where we really did feel that we should talk about it was because we like our motto is to provide everything to live life inspired. So when it comes to helping people, our vision is to help them to live an inspired life. Yeah. Getting caught up in all of the stuff that's going on, we felt like we needed to really help people put their focus on themselves and put their focus on what their outcome for their lives and their desires for themselves, and looking out for finding a way through everything that's happened to live an inspired life. But we realised that
to do that, it's about how to navigate, navigate from the inside out.
Yes, which we've been talking about, but I think we've kind of not really gone down the line of discussing what actually is going on out there and how big of an impact that might have for some people. For some people, they haven't come across it, and we speak to some people that just literally don't see that in their Facebook feeds, or just see one perspective, or don't see some of the stuff we're seeing. And, at the end of the day, if it's not coming across your mindset, then you don't have to go looking for it. It's not about looking for drama. But
stop this podcast right now and wait until next Sunday.
But I think we've definitely got a responsibility because we've got a lot of people in our network who are talking about this, who are questioning what they're hearing, they're questioning what's going on around them in terms of the COVID thing, questioning what's going on around them in terms of the US and the way that they see things. So we thought, okay, it's time now for us to stop piss farting around and just focusing on and helping people to understand and navigate that in terms of what we teach.
Yeah, I just think that in terms of what I was seeing and what was happening, part of the problem is that if you're not discussing it, then it's got control of you. Do you know what I mean? If you are discussing it, it's got control of you. So how do you work from the inside out? Be a warrior of understanding that your heart is important, your vision is important, your mission is important, you're here for a reason, and keeping focus on that stuff and not getting too deterred by it, and making sure that it's not, because the minute it has control of you is the minute you start making opinions, hating on people, hating on the world, colours, races, creeds. As soon as it's tapping into your consciousness, it's kidnapping your consciousness, it's stopping you from focusing on what it is you're here to do. And it's about the concept of people need to understand that if that shit's going on, it's going to be dealt with. That's not your job. Unless it is your fucking job, unless you're a copper, you work for the feds, you work for an organisation that hunts this sort of stuff down, and brings people to justice. But if that's not your job, I had a client last week saying to me, my whole vision in life now is to be able to, unmask all this stuff. I'm an advocate of QAnon. I want to be able to unmask all this stuff, be able to make sure that I take these conspiracies to the people. And I'm like, no, dude, that's not your job.
Don't be distracted by that stuff.
That's not your job. You're just getting distracted. And the problem is that when people hook into that stuff, they're using their consciousness and they don't realize that they're perpetuating the issue. So people go to me, no, if I'm chasing peace, I'm not perpetuating the issue. Well, you are. You are perpetuating the issue. Well, how does that work? Well, if you understand the human form, if we break the human form down into a subatomic particle and we look at one of the minimum structures in the universe, which is an electron, and an electron has a positive and negative phase. The minute you go creating the positive, you simultaneously create the negative. The minute you create the negative, you simultaneously create the positive. So the minute your perspective becomes lopsided, you perpetuate the issue. So people who chase peace are the ones that cause all the fucking war. People who want, you see all these people. I live in the hills, so people have signs at the front of their fucking house. Peace. Everybody be calm, peace on earth. But when you spend time with any of these people, they're fucking there's so much war going on in their homes. They're fighting with their husbands. They're battling with their kids. They fucking hate their grandparents. They battle with their neighbours. Their neighbours have dogs that eat their sheep and shit like that. And so people who push the illusion of peace are causing just as much war. Does that make sense? Because the minute you try to impose a singularity onto a humanity that from the macroscopic universe to the microscopic universe commands duality, you've got a fucking problem. So you cannot do that. So now we have what seems to be this push of the left and the right. Coming. It seems to be stemming out of the US, but there's this big conflict now of the the far right and the far left, and those issues that are coming out, and it's becoming a dirty war. It's crazy, and there's a war going on, and the question is, what is the war that's going on? And we were talking about it earlier. It's a deep spiritual war. There is a change in time. We're in a time right now where this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. This is the light age. It's the information age, and it's the information is becoming readily available to us. And that's great. So we are able to jump online. 1994, the internet kicks off, and suddenly we're able to fucking access a plethora of data that and now it's beyond comprehension. It's immense, and you can look up anything and find out anything. But you have to understand the things that you can find out are inspiring and there to help your life and help you, make sure things are better for yourself and help us to make a better future for humanity and da-da-da-da. But there's also some shit there as well. What also becomes available is what's been going on in the background.
So I think that this is the point where we started last, when we were talking about it before. You mentioned about responsibility and being in control and stuff like that. But the truth about it is that the first place I think we've got to look is the fact that maybe we're not in control. And this is not about denying responsibility. It's about understanding where our thought process come from and the way that we think has come from, right? Because if we're choosing and we're saying one thing is right and another thing is wrong, one thing is good, another thing is bad, one thing is rich, another thing is poor, all the work we've done over the years is to show people that what they've perceived in one way has not been the truth, has been only one part of the bigger picture. And we help them to figure out how they figure out what happened that made them think that one thing is good and another thing is bad, one thing is right and another thing is wrong. So when we understand that our perceptions have been they're of our making, right? But they have been influenced from the past, from different things that have happened to us right from childhood, then we can start to understand and start to realise that perhaps we have to take back control of how we think. And we've been studying Bruce Lipton, and the whole Bruce Lipton thing. I found that interesting when we were listening to that. I always find Bruce Lipton interesting anyway. But you know, when he speaks about the fact that there's 3 ways that our perceptions are birthed through nature. So you know, we have an innate understanding about things that are going to hurt us. We even as babies, we won't necessarily hold our hands over a flame because we know it's going to burn, or we'll pull away if there's pain, right? That's a nature part of how our perceptions are created. There's a nurture part, whereas, you know, he was saying about how babies, when they're born, they can learn. They actually know how to swim.
Yeah,
right?
they can swim like a dolphin.
They can swim like dolphins, but babies, when they're born, have what they do is they read their parents' faces. So they can read within the first 2 weeks, I think it was, he said, they can read the expression of their parents, and they can tell from their parents' faces whether what they're doing, whether their parents are feeling joy, anxiety, fear, excitement, all of the emotions. And so in order to navigate through the world as babies, we look to our parents to see their reaction. And obviously a lot of people's reaction to water is fear. So a baby learns to stay away from water because of how their parents react, right? And so that's the
because
nurture aspect.
the child is in liquid for 9 months. It's in water, so it's navigated that. That's a natural thing. It's probably one of the most natural things a child knows how to do.
Yeah. So our nurture helps like create our perceptions in some elements. And
so
then
so people know. So what happens in the first 2 weeks is that the child observes the eyes of the parent and watches their facial expressions, especially the eye area, and how the parent reacts. So as the child gets close to water and the parent goes, oh, you know, get away from the water, get away from the... Then the child gets a fright. This is why sometimes your kids will fall off a merry-go-round and then not cry, but immediately look at you and you panic and then they cry.
Yeah.
So they're just responding to your response as much as the merry-go-round didn't hurt them at all.
I remember watching you with the kids when they were growing up and noticing how you were with the kids around water and how you'd throw the kids in the pool, you'd let the water fall over their heads when they were in the bath and doing different things, stuff that we just didn't do. Do you know what I mean?
And if they were naughty, I'd just hold them underwater for a little bit longer.
No, you didn't. Don't say shit like that.
Sorry.
And I remember watching that and noticing how your kids became really confident around the water as a result.
But that had ramifications as well.
Yeah, of course it does.
Because one day I walked into the bath.
Yes.
And Lexi and Lola were in the bath, and Lexi had pulled Lola's legs and was holding her under the water and looking at me smiling, and I'm like, what the let her up. And I'm like, Lexi, you can't do that,
Yeah, of course, everything has...
Because they just thought it was a game.
Of course. So there's positives and negatives with everything, but so... that's the nurture part of it. And then finally he was talking about the self-conscious awareness, and he said that this is the most powerful of all, because when you have self-consciousness, the perception, your self-conscious perception, he said it can override nature and it can override the nurture.
Yeah.
And
so they can almost go in the bin.
Yes.
Based on this particular...
Yeah, in terms of your understanding of yourself. And he said that those perceptions and our ability to... perceive for ourselves is very, very powerful. We can adjust things as a result. But if our perceptions, right, and if we're not aware that our perceptions have been infiltrating us right from day dot, and we're more and more aware of this now in terms of our in terms of all sorts of different things, in terms of the toxins that are getting injected into us.
Yeah.
And not just injected, that are fed into us, right?
Which creates heavy metals in the brains, which has all sorts of neurological problems.
When we're talking about the fact that, we sit and watch the news or we sit and watch movies, and all of the movies are, they're telling a story, right? And that story
that's why it's called TV programming.
And like I was mentioning before, Lexi can't watch The Lion King or Nemo. She literally refuses to watch them because of the sadness of the parents dying or being lost, but the thing is that all Disney movies are the same. Like there's no Disney movies where a parent isn't gone or missing or something in some way or dead in some way. So we've got this stuff going in and we've got these messages going in all of the time, right?
So what's happening seems to be that there's a questioning now of the narrative of those messages.
Of course.
So it's like you were saying the other day, tell me one Disney movie that a parent doesn't die and a child is not left on its own.
Because then,
and what people don't realise is that this is factual, you can go and check it out, is that Walt Disney was a Mason of the 33rd ranking. He was one of the highest ranking Masons in Masonry.
and then the thing is that our kids, right from a very young age, have got a built-in fear and a built-in sadness attached to parents. Like one of Lexi's greatest fears is losing her family, like somebody dying. And if she's ever has a bad dream, that's what her dream is about. Does that make sense? So there's these things that and our perceptions that are influencing us, and then we go and make decisions based on that influence.
Yeah.
And this is where the problem. Well, it's also an opportunity, but this is where the decisions we're making, the choices that we make, the outcomes that we look for are based on the fact that we've got these things going on for us, these fears, and it's most of the time it's fears because we want to run away from those things that we feel are going to cause us pain. Yes, and we run towards something that we perceive is going to make us feel safe and happy, and so. Therefore, we will make choices, right, to listen to things, to go and do things, to go and act in certain ways because we've got a programming in some way of fear. We've got a programming in some way of fear.
I mean, another way to look at it is that if people understand, like, so the Masons, not the Masons, the Jesuits said, give me the child until it's 7, and I'll show you the man or the woman. So they knew that between 0 and 7, all the neural pathways in the brain are formed, right? So if you understand that, and now you program into a person or into a race that there are certain things that they should be afraid of, now what you've done is you've created a whole market for yourself. And what happens is that we know that the banks and fraternities and large organizations market to the insecurities of the masses. You know, if you drink Coca-Cola, you're going to feel like you're one of the gang running down the beach, da-da-da-da-da. If you smoke these cigarettes, you're going to feel like a man, da-da-da-da-da. If you drive this Audi, you're going to feel like a fucking doctor. You know, you're going to drive an Audi because doctors drive Audis. So they market to the insecurities of the masses because the masses don't want to feel those things. But what the masses don't realise is dealing with the feelings of those insecurities is where they're paralysed.
No, so this is where we come down to, because I've just said here that we're programmed with fear. Like that's a very generic, broad statement, and it's not saying that we don't have power over that. We do, and this is where our choices and our responsibility comes from. Does that make sense? So we were having a discussion the other day over lunch, and we were talking about that people that we naturally assume that everyone has our best interest at heart, right? And some people do, but some of them have the best interest at heart in relation to themselves. Does that make sense? They've got some outcome for themselves as well. And the best way to look at that is we talk about our parents, right? And our parents, sure, they've got our best interests at heart to a degree, but they also want to make life comfortable for them as well. So they will say things and do things that are going to make life comfortable for them as well as us, right? There's an agenda behind that. That's not a good or a bad thing, but we will trust what our parents say to us until such a point where we go, hang on a second, there's another way of thinking. And that tends to happen when we're exposed to school. You know, when we get to a certain school age, we've got a new level of subordination here. First, we were subordinating at a parental level. Now we're going to subordinate at a school level.
Yeah, so now you suddenly realise, hey, and I've seen it happen with all my kids.
Yeah.
You know, my school teacher knows more than my dad.
Yeah.
You know, my school teacher knows more than my mum. So, and I remember being out with someone on a golf course one day and they said to me, how old are your kids? And I'm like, you know, one is 4, but the other is 6.
What were you doing on a golf course quietly?
I don't know, honestly. The fuck, what do I do with this thing? Do I chase after you? Do I use it as some sort of axe? But one of the guys said to me, they're at that, they still believe you.
They're at that age.
They're at that age where they still believe you.
Yeah.
They believe you are the centre of the universe, you know? And then they start to realise that there's other people. So they stop subordinating to you and now they're subordinating to a class at a classroom level, primary school level.
Yeah. And then there's 7 levels of that, right? So there's family law, there's school law, there's community law, et cetera, right? Federal law, et cetera. And it seems to be that, and whenever you surpass one level, you can look back at the level you've just surpassed, and you don't take praise and reprimand from those people. So at your parental level, when you're subordinating it to them, right, you are afraid of the reprimand and move towards the praise, right?
Yeah.
When you surpass that, you can look back at the parents and you can go, right, it's not praise or reprimand. They were just doing what they did, but I don't need to be in that space anymore, right? So we grow past these different levels. But at the moment, we just have to look at it on a bigger scale, because at the moment what's happening is that all of that is happening at a governmental level, a big, and the top level you can get to is universal level, universal law. Because universal law is about...
Well, universal law says the only thing that guides you is what's inside
of you.
So if, even at the federal law levels, you're being, judicially governed by lawmakers,
an
right?
agenda of some sort.
An agenda of some sort. But at a universal level, you have no other place to go but within. So you have to listen to inside of you. So people understand, what we mean by universal law is there's a fundamental reason you won't stand on the fucking chair next to you and fling yourself on the ground, because you'll crack your head open and probably break your jaw on your arm. Yeah. So, and that.
Yeah.
So at a universal level, you have to trust that instead of anything else.
Yes.
And what seems to be happening at the moment is people are getting really fucking pushed and pulled, and there's this.
Well, this is this is what we're noticing, and this is what's kind of triggered us to be able to talk about this thing, is that what's happening around us is that people are now no longer just going, okay, because somebody tells me to, that means it's okay.
Yeah.
Somebody's telling me there's a virus, I need to think about that for myself, and that doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. It just means that some people are still at the point where they're listening to everything and taking it on face value, because they're assuming,
without having done any research,
because they're assuming that the agenda is in for them, for their best interest.
The powers that be is their best interest.
At their best interest, without understanding the concept of the subordinating concept, right?
Yeah, and I think for people to understand that, I think that they have to think about the fact that, I remember sitting with one of the heads of a research department of Pfizer, and it was fucking really interesting. And she said, every one of us here has had a pharmaceutical company help us health-wise, but at the same time, she was like, if you think that there are men in little white labs, in white coats in big labs trying to save your life, you're fucking wrong. They're in there trying to discover the next drug that gets them the next amount of income.
Well, this is another thing, right? Because an organism will never annihilate its reason for existence.
Yeah.
So the pharmaceutical industry relies on people being sick for it to survive.
Yeah.
So it will never annihilate its reason for existence.
Yeah.
The same with the medical profession. The same with the religion.
So what that means is
everything.
they won't cure you.
Yes.
They won't cure you. And in America, the third highest killer of Americans in 2017, 18, at a little over 500,000 people, was cancer. The next one was 700,000 people, which was cardiovascular. And then the third one was 750,000 people in hospitals. 750,000 people each year are killed from hospital-related issues.
Yeah.
Mistakes, Mistakes, fuck-ups. So the number one killer of Americans in hospitals was the hospital. You know what I mean? So people want, it seems that people want to believe that, I don't want to question that stuff. I've held on to this belief for so long. I come from a lineage of this belief. I believe they were trying to help us. I believe they were trying to cure us. And maybe at some stage they were, but now it's different. It's corporate.
There's definitely been changes where a lot of money becomes involved and power becomes involved. And therefore, whenever something is trying to take you away from the nature of who you are and the essence of who you are, then it's something to, in my opinion, is to question. That does not mean That
You
does
bet.
not mean that
Yeah.
there's a problem. Like the medical
Well,
profession is really great in terms of trauma,
Yeah.
and it's also really great in terms of so many things. But if we think that, especially with pharmaceuticals and especially with something like vaccines, which they have immunity for,
Yeah.
so they cannot get prosecuted if they cause injury through vaccines, then that to me is something to question.
Yeah.
The message, I suppose, of this anyway today is to say that these. To blindly just take at face value what you're being told is one thing. And at the end of the day, if that's where you're at and that's
okay.
what you want to be
That's
doing, that's
100%
100% okay.
absolutely okay.
Okay. But we've noticed that there's been a shift where people are now asking questions, and we're noticing it on Facebook. I noticed it on Channel 7. I noticed it on Channel 9. Channel 9, when you think of pandemics like the freaking zombie apocalypses, and things that you see on movies, right? And there are people dying everywhere, right? Channel 9, right, have put out this post saying something like, if anyone has had COVID or knows someone who's
tell
had
us your COVID
tell
story,
us
yeah.
the story. And we're like, if you're searching for these, like you're literally like fishing for this, how prevalent can it be? And it was actually quite reassuring to see the comments.
Oh my
in there.
God, it was hilarious.
It was like my grandmother died in 2009. I think she probably had COVID.
Yeah.
And things that like people were just taking the piss because they realised that for a media station to be doing
They took it
that,
down.
they ended up taking it down. Taking it down. They ended up taking it down. Then Channel 7 a couple of days later did a story on a young guy who had passed away.
Yeah.
And like it makes me really sad for the family of this young guy.
Yeah.
But they've plastered him all over the media saying he died of COVID, and his family were posting on there saying no, he died of cancer.
Yeah.
And they kept taking down
his family
his
stuff. And then his
messages
friends were
and
coming
his
on.
friends'
And then
messages
eventually
saying-
they had to take that story down.
Yeah.
But we have to understand that it's not, I think one of the key things here as well is it's not to get annoyed about it.
No. That's not the reason we're having this discussion.
No, there's no point, because the minute you get annoyed about it, they're controlling your we're vibrational frequency human beings.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we are. That's what we are. We're just operating at a really dense frequency, right? And so if you're not in charge of the frequency that you're broadcasting into reality, then that has charge of you. Mm-hmm. So the objective is, okay, how do we get to a point of compassion, love, empathy, care, understanding, and broadcast? That doesn't mean that you have to be a fucking monk, because I'm no monk. That doesn't mean that you have to be some fucking priest or stuff. You just got to be yourself. You just got to be open to being yourself, which is fucking tough for
I
people.
think that's the
because
first
people
step.
come from a lineage of not being able to think for themselves.
That's 100% the first step.
And not being able to, and it's not anybody's fault. There's an awakening. History leaves clues. I say it all the time. I've been saying it for years. History leaves clues. 2012 is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, the dawning of the awakening. It's an age, like the Iron Age, the Ice Age, the Stone Age. We're in an information age. Information is accessible, which is a light age. So, and I spoke about it on that podcast. I sat with Greg Braden after him and Bruce Lipton had just been brought into the UN to discuss their findings from civilizations that they had done digs on that had gone through this age. And when they went through this age, there was no sign of weaponry. I literally sent you a doco clip the other day from where they were talking about one of these civilizations. No sign of mass murder, no sign of killing, no sign of any weapons. So there was no weaponry. There were knives for cutting food, but there was no weaponry. So these civilizations have existed before within our time period. And not within our time period, but within our history, right? And so when they go in and they do these digs, like, it astounds them, like they just can't conceptualize. But we're born into societies where the first thing your kid sees is a movie about their mum and dad dying, or fucking someone getting killed, or the nasty uncle comes in and wants to kill the baby because its father has died and its father was the king. And so right from a very young age, the consciousness of our kids are told that it's okay to kill, to murder, to
we become so desensitized
to it. Even my kids, like, it's funny. I have little Ollie, and all he wants to do is attack me all the time. He fucking, he leaps out of wardrobes and leaps on top of the bed, and his big thing is he just wants to punch me in the nuts. He thinks that's hilarious, as much as we tell him all the time, you're not meant to hit daddy in the ghoulie, son, because that's dangerous. But so it becomes fucking normal that violence is normal within the family. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a victim of it. I've done it. Well, not a victim. I've done the same thing myself. You know, I've messed with my kids and I fight with my kids and I roll around with my kids and that sort of stuff. And so that now is starting to show that we're starting to question those things and go, fuck, this is not okay. You know, we've been bred to believe that it's normal.
Well, I think that now what the question is, and now what the outcome should be as a result of today, what I think the message from today is that we have to question things. And again, we don't have to. If you want to believe everything that you're told and that's the place you're at, that's actually okay. There's nobody telling you not. But in order to live an inspired life and to live the most inspired life, which is what our outcome is for people, and this is why people listen to us, the best way to go about that is to start to become aware of what you previously were not aware of, because your subconscious processor is the most powerful processor that you have. We think that just because we think something consciously that we have power to change something. But changing your mind and changing your conscious mind does not change your reality. Your reality is running and being run by your subconscious programming. Because even as a kid, you might want to try the water, but you're scared subconsciously because you've picked up that you need to be afraid of this, right? Yep. So without realising, we're actually run by this subconscious. And if we want to do something about it, we have to do something about that subconscious. And the start of that is becoming aware of it. Now, we do it deeper when we do our seminars, right? But the start of that and the first part that anybody needs to play and the first thing that anyone needs to realise is that there's something going on and I'm out of control here. And the way that people normally recognise that is through their cycles. How come I keep going through the same relationship? Even though it's a different relationship, a different person, the same things happen in my relationships. How come I keep going through the same financial cycles, the same things happening, and I'm doing the same thing over and over, whether it's 10,000, 15,000, whatever money I've got, it doesn't matter. The cycle remains the same. And whether it's work cycles, children's cycles, partnership cycles, it doesn't matter. Just let me finish here, sorry, Mitch. This is an example that because consciously we all want greater than that, right? Yeah. But subconsciously something is keeping us in that loop. Yep. And the first thing that we can do to make a transformation in our own lives is to recognise that we're in a loop and to have awareness and bring to our conscious awareness where that loop may have come from and where that cycle may have started.
Which is what I was going to say, because when you start to think about your thinking, right? So you start to go, okay, why can I not earn any more money than my dad? Yep. Why do I feel like I'm everything I said I wouldn't be as a parent, I'm being as a parent. So and why is it that I get depressed when there's fucking no reason for me to be depressed? And why is my brain thinking this way? So it's about asking yourself the question, is your thinking, or is it being influenced by what you're seeing? Does that make sense? And are your thoughts your fucking thoughts? When you're having a thought, asking yourself, where have I picked that up from? Where does that thought come from? Is that really my thought? And I think that's the beginning of people starting to wake up. It's not about getting angry with these banks, fraternities, organisations, that sort of stuff. It's not about that.
Responsibility starts at home. Yeah, you have to have responsibility for the way you're thinking. Yeah, and it's about drawing yourself out and understanding that for the first time you may never have actually had a fucking original thought ever. Ever. Your thinking and what's going on in your head has been bred into you, and we're bred like racehorses. Like, I've sat with some of the wealthiest people in India and they've said the same thing. Mitch, you're fucking bred. You were raised like a racehorse. So you have to understand your environment, the epigenetic environment that you were born into is influencing you on a cellular level. If you want things to change, you have to think about how you're judging your environment, what's coming up on your feeds, what are you looking at, but let alone that, what are you doing with it? How is that affecting you? And I think the ultimate question in these podcasts that we want to do over the next couple of podcasts is to get people to start to get to a space where they understand, yes, this is the end of those cycles.
And for us to help people, we have to hold a space for people to be able to come out of the dark and into the light and start to emerge into listening to themselves, starting to emerge into being, whole human beings, thinking for themselves, and understand that if that's what's going on, it's not about getting angry about it. It's about because the minute you get angry about it, you're part of it. You're fucked. The minute you start getting pissed off, angry, surprised, depressed, it's affecting how you operate in the world. The minute you start doing that, you're gone. And there was a great thing we heard today where the guy says, step outside and listen to your senses. And then ask yourself, is there a virus? Like, step outside and look around and smell the air, look at the trees. Your senses, your body will tell you if you're under attack of any sort. Your body is the only mechanism. You don't need to listen to the fucking news. They're not going to tell you. All news is lopsided, non-substantial. We know this. I'm not being charged about it. I'm telling you that news is lopsided.
Because, the reason being is because it's from one person's perspective, and they want to share that information for a purpose. For a purpose,
yeah,
right?
because
which is to sell newspapers,
which is their narrative,
yep.
which is to make money.
Yep.
Does that make sense? If I tell you a problem, you're going to pay money to get away from the problem.
Yeah. So I need to say something though before we finish up. The concept of that our thoughts aren't our own and it was bred into us, right? We have discussed that today, but I don't want anyone to think that I don't want anyone to think that takes away our personal responsibility for our thoughts. We pick these things up over time as we grow up and as we consume information through outside means, right? But at the end point, right, nobody is responsible for your thoughts other than you. You've created your perceptions, and if you are relying or if you're blaming anybody else for those perceptions, then you have no mastery of your own life. Responsibility is the greatest form of empowerment. As soon as you become responsible, you take back the key to unlocking whatever it is that has held you captive in your subconscious thoughts or whatever. The reason that they're there is irrelevant. That they're there, that we've got subconscious stuff going on and programming going on is there, and it's important to know. But at the end of the day, it's so important to understand that regardless of whether it was bred into us, it's about the awareness, and that's our responsibility.
Yeah, well, that's where it starts, yeah.
That's our responsibility, because if anybody is blaming somebody else for the way that they're thinking and just going, oh, I was born like that, there's nothing I can do about it, well then basically you've basically said, I'm just going to deal and live with the way that my mum and dad or however I was programmed, I'm just going to let it be, and you have no personal power. And when you have no personal power, you can be fed fear and you can be controlled. And the first part and the first port of call with everything is that you have to make sure that you are responsible and understand your own responsibility in the part that you play. Because remember, we said the other day as well, if if you know who controls you because you know who you can't criticise, which was me paraphrasing a statement by Voltaire. Yeah. You know who controls you because you know who you can't criticise. And if you cannot criticise, and this is where at the moment that shows you your level of subordination, it shows you at what level you're operating. Yep. But
that had really come to fruition when I'd gone out for dinner with a bunch of the guys. These guys are 40 to 50 years old, good mates, we've hung out for 30 years. And no one was bringing up any of the stuff, the topics of what's going on
that
in the
everybody's
world.
Actually talking about and thinking about.
No
really.
one would bring it up because nobody wanted to. I think ultimately because first off, people didn't want to impose their view in case they would be shown that their view was wrong, because nobody wants to feel wrong in any of this, because nobody really knows what the fuck is going on. Nobody's ever going to know what the fuck is going on out there.
What we can only know, this is the point of this, right? Because what we can only know is what the part that we play in it, and our responsibility towards that is to step up.
But I have to say, I was quite optimistic because that's the first step is in not saying anything, is starting to go, I don't want to say anything because if I say something and it's wrong, that means that there must be a part of me knows that no matter what I say, it's wrong, so it's not the truth. Does that make sense? So when people are out and they're not talking, when you have somebody out there and they're banging the table and kicking the chairs and fucking overturning the restaurant because they fucking, are pro or against whatever, that's primitive, ugga bugga. That's not an evolved state. We're not evolving if we're doing that. Evolving is, okay, the first level of evolution is to stop and say, okay, I have to become responsible. Responsibility is about your ability to respond to what you're seeing. Responsibility. And not get reactive, but to actually, to become proactive, and to become proactive and starting to think about, okay, I have to take care of myself. I know that if I get charged up by this, if I open a conversation here, I'm going to get emotional, I'm going to get annoyed, it's going to make me angry, somebody will disagree with me, da-da-da-da-da. And so now you're actually starting to wake up. Does that make sense? Because you're actually starting to realize, oh, okay, so the key here is not to get engaged or hooked into this stuff. Does that make sense? The key here is to stop and start to listen to myself, understand the left and the right are fucking two wings of the same bird flying in the same direction. The question is, who's the head? Who's controlling it? And at the end of the day, our objective is to say, don't be pro-left, pro-right, but
sit above the bird and watch
be
it.
the sky, be the part that encompasses all and understands that whatever's going on is just part of the evolution of our consciousness. We're going to wake up from it and everything's going to be all right. No matter what, everything's going to be all right.
We've got a lot to say on that. We could keep going on. But let's leave it at that for now. That was good. Cool. That was good.
See you, buddy.
If you found this information inspiring, make sure you subscribe and tune in to the next Dorothy and the Dealer podcast.